Hello, my friends. It's your buddy Phil here, project management trainer and coach. Let's talk about the differences between TDD, BDD, and ATDD. We get this question all the time. We train Agile courses. Students want to know the difference. So let's talk first about TDD. TDD stands for Test-Driven Development. Test-driven development is a software development process that relies on the repetition of a very short development cycle with unit testing, the key word being unit testing. Now let's hone in on that word unit testing for a second. In computer programming, unit testing is a software testing method by which individual source code sets of one or more computer program modules together with associated control data, usage procedures, and operating procedures are tested to determine whether they are fit for use. So in the back of your mind, I want you to think about testing little chunks of code in a modular fashion. That needs to be in the back of your mind. Otherwise, you will miss what this is about. All right. So we're relying on short cycles with unit testing. The developer is going to write an initially failing piece of code. And then the developer produces the minimum amount of code to pass that test, and then refactors the code to acceptable standards. We call this red, green, clean. Red, green, clean is pretty much writing a test that fails, red. Make it work, green. Clean it up, eliminate redundancy, refactor the code, right? And we see these test first concepts in XP, ATDD, which we're going to talk about as well, BDD and others. But let's first talk about the concepts. Where do they come from? This comes from extreme programming. And this is just one of the concepts. Basically, the concept is you write your test cases, how you're going to validate the thing or verify the thing before you actually build it. Now you can actually use this in building physical products as well, even though I started off by saying software development, right? But you can use this concept in building physical products. So if you have test harnesses, for example, validation of things you need to do, make sure you understand how that thing is going to be validated before you actually build it. Then you're going through the validation process. You know what to expect as you're building the product. The general process of TDD is you write your test cases or your test harness before you build the product, and then you execute those test cases. Of course, they're going to fail because you've not built the product yet. You haven't implemented it. The next step is to build the product, right? Until those validation steps, those test cases pass. So it's red, green, clean. Red, you write your test cases, you execute them, they fail. Green, you keep building and working on it until they pass. And then clean, eliminate the redundancy, clean things up, make sure everything follows standards. So by the time you're done, you've got a unit. The key word again, unit, a piece of the work that passes the test cases and it meets engineering standards. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? We can say, according to Wikipedia, it's a software development process relying on software requirements being converted to test cases before software is fully developed. Tracking all software development by repeatedly testing the software against all test cases. This is opposed to software being developed first and test cases created later. Now, the Agile Assessment Guide created by the US government, really great publication I would recommend. They list out strengths and limitations of TDD. Strength, continuous delivery of working software. Errors are easier to identify and correct in smaller batches of code. Erroneous code does not proceed past development stage. Automation of testing can be incorporated. The limitations, strength and accuracy of code depends on developer or tester who writes the tests. It doesn't ensure execution of the tests in the build process if test cases are not part of the automated test suite. It does not ensure adequate maintenance of the test suite over time. Let's go into the next one to talk about here. It's BDD, Behavior-Driven Development. BDD is a system design and validation practice that uses test-first principles and English-like scripts. What do we mean by English-like scripts? Well, this is from the Agile Practice Guide from the PMI. Let's dive into another definition from the Agile Alliance and see how it helps us. BDD can be looked at as a synthesis and refinement of practices stemming from TDD and ATDD. BDD augments TDD and ATDD with the following tactics. Apply the 5 whys principle to each proposed user story so that its purpose is clearly related to business outcomes. Now, what is 5 whys? Asking why 5 times. Why do you want this? So that. Why that? So that, and you keep drilling down till you understand. BDD involves thinking from the outside in. In other words, implementing only those behaviors which contribute most directly to these business outcomes so as to minimize waste. Also involves describing behaviors in a single notation which is directly accessible to domain experts, testers, and developers so as to improve communication. Apply these techniques all the way down to the lowest levels of abstraction of the software, paying particular attention to the distribution of behavior so that evolution remains cheap. Now let's go a step further. Let's talk about the format that is used for BDD, and this will bring some additional light to the topic. BDD uses the Cucumber format, the given, when, then. And the name Cucumber, it was just a name that stuck. The girlfriend of the creator threw it out and he decided to use it and it stuck. Given, when, then is a template intended to guide the writing of acceptance tests for a user story. Given some context, when some action is carried out, then a particular set of observable consequences should obtain. Now, let's talk about the origin of this. So I did mention in the naming of the format, Daniel Terhorst North had a fiance who thought, well, this would be a good idea to call it something cool, Cucumber. That's why it was called that name. But the format for BDD is given, when, then. It's quite straightforward. Given some context, when some action is carried out, then a particular set of observable consequences should obtain. So as I said, Daniel created this back in the early thousands, as he explained in a 2006 article called Introducing BDD. It grew from a response to test-driven development as a way to help programmers on Agile teams get straight to the good stuff of knowing how to approach testing and coding and minimize misunderstandings. You see, that's the cool thing about BDD, is that human element. It's that piece that was missing from TDD. So the Cucumber format, again, is given a condition. When I perform an action, then I expect the result. Let's take a look at an example here. Given my bank account is in credit and I made no withdrawals recently, when I attempt to withdraw an amount less than my card's limit, then the withdrawal should complete without errors or warnings. You could flip that and say, given my bank account is not in credit, when I attempt to withdraw any amount, then the withdrawal should not complete with errors and warnings. You get the point. So it's just a given, when, then format. Now, to make things even more colorful, the Cucumber format is effected with a language, when we talk about English-like scripts, called the Gherkin format. Gherkin serves multiple purposes: unambiguous executable specification, automated testing using Cucumber, and document how the system actually behaves. If you want to know more about this, go to the website where this is from. It's cucumber.io. You can also learn a lot more about BDD. So 3 things: the confluence of automated tests, living documentation, and executable specifications. So let's take a look at some more information from cucumber.io. When you think about BDD, think about user story, discovery, formulation, automation, and working software. What is the big deal here? The discovery. See that? So BDD encourages collaboration across roles. Encouraging collaborations across roles to build shared understanding of the problem to be solved. That's the key thing, understanding what is to be solved. Because if you don't understand what is to be solved really well, and you're in a world of TDD, it's going to be unfortunate. This ensures more collaboration to ensure we're building the right stuff. Working in rapid small iterations to increase feedback and the flow of value. Producing system documentation that is automatically checked against the system's behavior. That's the key word, system behavior. We do this by focusing collaborative work around concrete real-world examples that illustrate how we want the system to behave. That is the key thing, how we want the system to behave, given, when, then. It's pretty simple, right? We use those examples to guide us from concept through to implementation in a process of continuous collaboration. So you understand how the 5 whys is leveraged. You understand how we go through discovery, formulation, automation. The key word in your head needs to be one of collaboration. And again, don't forget the word English-like scripts. That's key to understanding BDD. Now, let's talk about ATDD, acceptance test-driven development. Probably you're finding these differences come into light more, especially if you've read any of these publications where these things are talked about. Acceptance test-driven development, ATDD, involves team members with different perspectives, customer, development, testing, collaborating to write acceptance tests. You see the subtlety there? The first one we looked at, TDD, we talked about unit tests. The second one, BDD, we talked about behavior of the system. And now we're talking about acceptance tests. So these parties collaborate to write acceptance tests in advance of implementing the corresponding functionality. The collaborative discussions, note the word again, collaboration, that occur to generate the acceptance test is often referred to as the 3 amigos, representing the 3 perspectives of the customer. What problem are we trying to solve? How might we solve this problem? And what about ... Acceptance test-driven development is all about creating acceptance tests first before delivery begins. You see the similarities, but we're talking more about acceptance tests here. The entire team gets together and discusses the acceptance criteria for work product. Then the team creates the test, which allows the team to write just enough code and automated tests to meet the criteria. So when you think about ATDD, you got to think about collaboration as well. But as opposed to thinking about working in isolation as a developer in the world of TDD with limited understanding, this beefs up the awareness and understanding of the acceptance criteria. So my friends, let's take a look at all of these TDD, BDD, and ATDD all on one screen in a comparison table from the good people at BrowserStack. Here you can see the main focus of TDD is unit tests. BDD, the main focus, understanding requirements, really collaborating, getting your arms around it, using the concept of 5 whys and English-like scripts. ATDD, it's all about writing acceptance tests, getting to understand though, but really writing those acceptance tests. The definition of TDD, focusing on implementing features and unit tests. BDD, focusing on system behavior and behavior tests. ATDD, focusing on user requirements or acceptance tests. The people involved, TDD, primarily the developer. BDD, developers, customers, QAs. ATDD, developers, customers, QAs. The language, TDD, any language used to program, Java, JavaScript, Python, C++. BDD, very specific to English-like scripts using that gherkin format. Given, when, then. All right. And English and gherkin for ATDD. The tools in particular that I used are for TDD, a bunch of tools you can see on the screen, JDave, JBehave, spec, flow, all that. You can see very similar ones I use for BDD, ATDD, TestNG, and a few others. If you have found this to be useful, share with your buddies who are scratching their heads wondering, what is the difference between all these three things? Now, I know lots of you taking this exam, whatever the exam you're taking, you may or may not be a coder or a developer or even a tester. Maybe you've never even written a single line of code all your life. It doesn't have to be that difficult to understand. So at that really high level, in your head, to delineate one from another, think TDD, all about unit tests, developer, pretty much working there, not really a whole lot of collaboration. BDD, whole lot more collaboration. Remember the given, when, then format. Remember the gherkin format. Also remember that Cucumber is used here. Go to the Cucumber website that I showed you on the screen a few minutes ago. I remember the 5 whys, ATDD, acceptance test. I hope this helps you. All the very best in your endeavors, and bye for now.